Well, we'd like to kick this off and get started real quickly. I'm Troy Schulte, City Manager, and joining me at the table are members of the Selection Committee. To my right is Chair of our Airport Committee, Councilwoman Jolie Justice. To my left is Chair of Transportation and Infrastructure, Councilman Jermaine Reed. To his left is Director of Aviation, Pat Klein. To his left is the Aviation Department's Chief Financial Officer, John Green. And to his left is a guy that we have postponed retirement at least twice to get through this process, is Director of Engineering and Planning at KCI, Phil Munsey. So this comprised the Selection Committee. I want to thank them and all of our team members, Hush Blackwell, Emeritus, Lee Fisher, Finance Department, our city's Law Department. We put in a lot of hours on this process. I think it's a process that we, as a city, can be proud of the outcome. I think there will be a hearty debate about the outcome, and that's okay. But we have gone through our due diligence, and we think we have recommended a project that will allow a new terminal at KCI to go forward, hopefully with a vote of approval in November, but something that all of our citizens can be proud of once it's completed. So we went through a thorough process. We tried to keep an open mind to all proposals. There was a lot, as you know, there was a great deal of noise surrounding the process. But again, I give the committee, led by our outside counsel and internal House staff, a lot of great work in trying to marshal it, focus that information, make sure that we were dealing with facts and data only, and try to come to a decision that was reflective of the committee as a whole, not individuals in particular. So with that, I think we will kick it off a little bit with an, Rod, you want to kind of make the big reveal? For our purposes, what we have decided to do is the city, we will be recommending Edgemoor to the City Council. This is just a recommendation. The decision the final decision will be made by the City Council, and that process will start as early as next week, maybe even starting as early as tomorrow. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Councilwoman Justice and Councilman Reed and kind of walk through the rationale, get more about the process. And again, I want to thank all of our committee members for their work. There was well on 40 hours of work by just this group trying to solicit and work through these issues.
So one of the things that we were tasked with as a selection committee was making sure that we had the best proposal for Kansas City, that it was the most cost effective, and that it really brought forth the best project for the city and all of the folks who use KCI. We felt at the end of this process that the selection committee felt that the Edgemoor team brought the best deal to the people of Kansas City. They have over $60 billion in aviation projects across the country and over $10 billion in public and private infrastructure projects. Their proposal when it comes to financing was frankly the lowest cost option to the city. It provided the most flexibility and gave us an option for more project and less cost to the city, and throughout the entire process, their financing proposal preserves the city's credit. The Edgemoor team demonstrated a commitment to working flexibly with the city, the airlines, and the public to incorporate an airport design that showcased the best of Kansas City. They presented a detailed plan, schedule, and risk analysis for meeting its on-time and on-budget commitment to the city. They have put together a team that includes Clark Construction, also Clarkson and White's Construction, and SOM Architects. They have a proven track record of working efficiently and positively with organized labor. They also have a proven track record of far exceeding goals for minority and woman-owned businesses, and a unique training and education mentoring programs for minority and woman-owned businesses. The Edgemoor team recognized the city's commitment to sustainability, and they actually took it a little bit farther. They're not just proposing a LEED certified building. They want to make this terminal green, including a net positive or carbon neutral building. They have a team that incorporates the ideas of smart cities and everything that has been pushed forward and made us a national leader on the Smart Cities Initiative, and they are committed to working with both the city, the council, the airline partners, and all stakeholders to make sure that this is the best proposal and the best project for Kansas City. In the end, I will say this has not been an easy process. this has been a tough fight, and frankly, it should be a tough fight because this is a billion-dollar project that is going to be transformational for our city. This means thousands of jobs. It means an economic development future for Kansas City that is bright, and my hope now is that we can take this recommendation to the council, let the council look at all of the facts and data that we have presented, let the council make the decision on how we proceed, and then ultimately it will be up to the voters of Kansas City in November of this year to decide whether or not they agree that Kansas City is ready for a new single terminal.
So let me start off by saying also a big thank you to the selection committee members, all of them who certainly put in well over 100 hours in terms of our work throughout this process. One of the things that has been most important to me throughout the process is making sure that we maintain a real sense of my core values for sure, and that is transparency and making sure that there was a lot of integrity involved in this process. And I can tell you as we get up from this table and make this announcement today that this committee has acted independently in our thought process with integrity and transparency throughout this long-awaited process. As Councilmember Justice has mentioned, our work certainly goes now to the full City Council. The full City Council has a great task ahead of them. What is most important, I think, for all of us and the citizens of Kansas City to keep in mind is that a world-class city certainly deserves a world-class airport. And come November, we as citizens of this city will have the opportunity to determine whether or not we build a brand new single terminal airport for KCI. And I think that as we approach that conversation, it's important that we do it with respect and a tone and tender of leadership that this council and the city certainly has continued to show throughout this process. And so the recommendation that's before us, as I mentioned, it certainly goes to the council, and I guess at this time we'll certainly entertain any questions that anyone will have.
Was it a split vote on the committee for who got the recommendation? That's my understanding.
The council has determined, this selection committee basically has determined that it is a majority of the council of this selection committee, and we speak with one voice as our recommendation and acknowledge that it is the recommendation that Edgemoor will be the recommendation that we send to the full council.
So you're not saying what the vote was?
We didn't take an actual vote at all, and of course throughout our process that is not necessarily something that's been identified. And so as I have referenced, there is no vote that we can basically tell you in terms of a tally. Our recommendation is to the full council for, in one voice, the Edgemoor, which we have before us.
Before Burns and Mack was going to finance the airport, as I understand it, is that the same with Edgemoor?
Yes. All the proposals that were presented, all four proposals that were presented incorporated private financing as part of their proposal.
Can you describe the structure and the partners with their private financing?
I can have, I might have John Green detail them in more details. The Edgemoor proposal, the main source, obviously Edgemoor is their financing group. Meridian is a part of that group. John, you might detail some of the other ones, but they had a full fleshed out proposal. And as we articulate, they offered actually a full range of options from a equity to a pure public or a 100% privately placed public debt, which I think is the analysis that the airport committee and the finance committee have worked through is actually gets that cheapest cost. And they were the only proposer to bring forward that idea, saying we might do a 100% debt option, which was an intriguing idea as we try to make sure we maximize value and minimize cost as a part of this project. So,
tell us what is the annual contribution under the Edgemoor proposal versus what it was under the other?
when we normalized them, when we normalized all the proposals using our assumptions, that was a great debate about this, the additional questions. When we normalized, nearly all the proposals came back around $74.3 million. You may remember that the maximum guaranteed price that the airlines had agreed to was $85.2 million. When we normalized the proposals using our assumptions, we had some at 74.2, 74.3. So they weren't all essentially the same number. There was a different assumptions about rate of return, the amount of equity, whether they had a debt service reserve. When they got done and when we normalized it, wrapped it around our existing debt, it was remarkable how close they
You
came
said
out.
earlier that Edgemoor was the cheapest option.
Well, because they were the one that offered up potentially the 100% debt financing option, which brings it probably closest to the conduit option, which was not as cheap as general airport revenue bonds, but it was within a pretty small margin. So there's a price you pay for private equity. All the proposals had done creative ways to make that affordable, and so again, we had very good proposals. I think that's the unanimous recommendation of the selection committee is this was not a slam dunk. We had to work through each of these details because there were pluses and minuses, and there were fine points of all the proposals that we had to wade
But
through.
was the financing the differentiator for you and your colleagues, or was it design, was it convenience, was it hometown team versus non-hometown team? Can you give us some sense of the hierarchy that you reached this decision on, Troy? Maybe.
I'm happy to weigh in on that. So from the very beginning of the RFQP process, which the council put together, we said we were going to look at 3 criteria: experience, we were going to look at project approach, and financial approach. It was our determination that their financial approach gave the city the most flexibility. Frankly, the vast majority of our conversations beyond the financial had to do with project approach, because we all had things that were important to us when it related to project approach. And Edgemoor showed their ability to come forward and collaborate with the city on all of the things that were important to us, whether it was MBE, WBE requirements, or a community benefits agreement, or relationships with local workforce and the trade unions. We looked at all of those things and put those into the project approach. Additionally, Edgemoor came forward with a very detailed timeline of how they plan to roll out the entire process, from the design all the way through the construction process. And so those were very important to us. Those were all within, as I said, the financial approach. It was the consensus, the project approach. It was the consensus of the selection committee, however, that when it came to experience, that frankly, all of the proposers had significant experience. Right. I mean, when you put together the teams in their totality, all of them have multiple experience building airports and frankly, doing private financing.
So I guess what I'm asking is, what's the tiebreaker? What was, if there was a tiebreaker between all 4 proposals, was it financing, was it approach? I mean, what is it that pushed Edgemoor?
I think it was the collaborative approach that Edgemoor offered up that basically said we're going to work with everybody. We don't have any preconceived notions. We'll work within the Exhibit K, the Exhibit L process. We said we'll build what the city wants, and they offered basically a collaborative approach that everyone could basically agree with and say, you're not going to have any drama of, are they pushing an agenda, or do they have a preconceived outcome, or do they want to adjust the project size to do something that they think is most important? They basically said, here's an open book. We'll work with you to get what the project that the city wants. It really was an attitude, and it was an approach that resonated with me. Was they're like, hey, whatever you want, we've got the expertise, the ability to deliver that project that on time and at a budget you can afford with the expertise. And they had local components, but they had national expertise. So again, we had very good proposals. But so it ultimately came down to more of a feel and somebody that you felt you could work with.
So they kind of low profile and weren't really part of some of that noise, perhaps, that you referenced earlier. Did that weigh into the decision?
Yes.
Oh, so can you expand
Well,
on that?
I think it's one of those issues is they let the process work the process. And I thought that was, again, their response to us originally was, we'll do whatever you guys would like us to do. That resonated with me as an individual. And they stuck to that process throughout. So they didn't try to articulate their benefits or articulate any of the opponent's perceived weaknesses in the court of public opinion. They just said, here's our proposal. We're ready to work with you. Let us know how we can help. And that resonated with me as we went through this process.
Troy, the bonds you were talking about, the 100% debt financing, is that conduit bonds? You're not talking about airport revenue?
No, they won't be airport revenue bonds, but they could be a privately placed conduit bond, and they were the only ones that said.
Who would issue those?
Well, they would, but it would probably be an agency.
Could it be through the Port Authority?
Could be through the Port Authority. Could be through Platte County Industrial Development Authority. That's all that would have to be negotiated through development agreement and the memorandum of understanding, but they were the only proposal that said, hey, we don't even need to put private equity into this deal if it gets you a deliverable that you want. So.
There were threats of litigation from Burns and Mack regarding a conflict of interest with Edgemoor. How do you guys feel moving forward after those threats were made and Burns and Mack was obviously not chosen?
I'll kick it off, and happy to let the council add to it. We worked through it. We thoroughly vetted. That was part of the issues. There was a series of conflict of interests or ethical allegations that slowed the deliberations of this process down. We were comfortable with both the outside counsel's response and our city attorney's research into the investigation, that there had been no involvement by Hush Blackwell with Edgemoor as any part of any sort of deal after May 10th of 2016. So we didn't see a conflict going forward, and it allowed us to keep on task. And again, I want to thank Hush Blackwell for, they're taking a lot of shots that aren't unwarranted, and they managed an unwieldy process with a whole lot of stakeholders in the process, and they kept this committee, and they kept 45 people that were engaged on the periphery of this process, engaged and working to an outcome. So they deserve my the credit. They've done a nice job on this process.
Do you expect any further litigation?
Probably. I think, again, when you get back to $1 billion project, I think people are going to, there's going to be people who are going to feel aggrieved. That's their right. Again, I'm comfortable in the recommendation that the selection committee has put forward. That will be one of the issues that I'm sure the city council will start to have to wade through as they go through this process. We took a path that we thought probably minimized the potential for litigation, but again, it's $1 billion project. There may be litigation out here, regardless of who we adjust.
It appeared that there were concerns with the hometown team, if you will, with their financial approach, about whether existing debt would be subordinate to the new debt that would, or the private financing, private placement. Was that fatal to their proposal, or? It was an issue that we spent a lot of time working on in terms of their original proposal and its consistency with the city's master bond ordinance and the potential impact it would have had on our existing outstanding tax-exempt bonds. So, outside counsel, outside. Finance, inside finance, outside legal, spent a great deal of time and effort wading through that. It was the unanimous recommendation of that group in totality that the proposal presented by Burns, the original proposal presented by Burns and McDonald, the hometown team, created an inconsistency issue that would have plagued the project going forward. So that's why, in an effort to avoid the potential for litigation, we went a different direction in our deliberations after that point.
Troy, so if the consensus is for 100% conduit financing, that suggests that the whole idea of private equity early on was a disqualifier in some ways, or at least something you, as a consensus, did not support. And so in essence, you're getting a process that you could have had anyway if you'd just gone for airport revenue bonds and gone through the sort of regular order. So can you talk to us a little bit about the value of this process? Was it, I mean, if you've arrived at a point that's quite different than maybe.
Well, we haven't precluded private financing. I think that's part of the conversation. Again, the Edgemoor proposal allowed us that maximum range of flexibility in terms of an equity versus no equity versus, and so it allows, I think, for some negotiations. The other advantage of private equity, quite honestly, that has an impact is some of the issues that we weighed on as part of some of the value statements that we liked in all the proposals, such as community benefit agreements. Some of those types of issues can only be done if there's private equity brought into this deal, because you can't use direct public funds for those types of off-airport purposes. So those are the types of issues we're going to have to work through. But I think it's been an evolutionary process. And again, what it showed us, I think as a result of the process, is all the proposals said they could deliver a project by the end of 2021. Under our traditional process, we were looking at 2023, 2024 under a traditional process. So you're getting that speed to market, which I think is important for Kansas Cityans, that they're not going to wait a decade for an airport to be delivered, a terminal to be delivered. And so we got a lot of value out of that public-private approach. We also got some creative ideas in terms of financing structure that I think led to some
help in terms of formulating this overall approach. I think if I do it all over again, I'd still recommend we do a design build finance just to see what our options are. And then we can make, the flexibility with an RFQ is, we get the ability to pick and choose and build a program that makes sense for Kansas City.
And I guess Jolie and maybe Jermaine, you want to kick into, that this process has been valuable. Is that, back in May, it was going to be done. Can you tell us now if you think the city is in a better position than it would have been absent this process?
I think absolutely. I think the fact that the council sat down and collaboratively worked together to come up with the process, and that the process maintained, the selection committee process maintained its integrity throughout, that we had really valuable internal and external advisors who brought this to us. I think in the end, Kansas City is the one who wins because of this process.
Yeah, Jermaine, you agree with that? I mean, it's been messy, everyone would agree with that.
Yeah, my answer is yes. The process certainly has been one that has been met with a lot of criticism, but I can tell you that my council colleagues and Mayor James should be applauded for their leadership and also their attention to this matter. The reality of it is that all of us, as you saw with the unanimous vote for the ballot language, agree that we need to do something at KCI, and that something potentially is building a new airport. And I think that this process, as we sort of saw back in 2014, when the mayor's committee really established what Exhibit K was, and then we came to April of 2016, and then the council's involvement throughout this process, and even probably the elephant in the room when the announcement was made with Burns and Mack. I think the council wanted to make sure that they were involved in this process. Hence, that's when we asked that we would go out and make sure that we would have an extension in terms of allowing for other bidders to actually submit their proposals and allow for the work that we've done over this process that I believe has been met with integrity and transparency. We along the way have tried to do everything we could to communicate to the public some of the high-level happenings that were going on within our room and in part of our discussions, from our financial advisors who have communicated with us to our legal advisors. In addition to that, the airline partners as well. All of them have played a crucial role in this decision, but again, not enough can be said about our colleagues on the council who represent the citizens of Kansas City and wanted to make sure that their voices were heard throughout this process. And I think that we have seen that sort of commitment to detail, and I think that as the council receives this recommendation that we will hand to them, and we have given them all an update in terms of where we are, and we will have additional discussions about our process tomorrow in a closed session. It will then at that time be able to really confirm, I believe, the process that we've gone through has been transparent. Is it possible for Burns and Mack to be part of this Edgemoor team?
That would be up to Edgemoor.
If there's no agreement or no understanding that Burns and Mack or any of the other bidders would be subsidiaries or subcontractors.
Right.
One of the key points that emerged when some of the proposals became public was this idea that, as a result of the procurement process, or the solicitation, whatever you want to call it, that the city or the airport as an enterprise fund would save, however hundreds of millions of dollars as a result of that procurement. Do you agree? Do you guys agree with that statement?
No, I think, because remember, when the MOU first came forward with Burns and Mack, the agreement said up to 85.2, which is the maximum number. Right. And then through that proposal process, we ended up asking, and we had, as you saw, as they released their numbers, they were calculating, doing different rates. I remember the conversation with Dave over, I bid it, I can get 3.2%, 2.9% interest on a BBB rating. When you normalize it to those types of issues, that's why I said, when we got done normalizing it, wrapping around our debt, we ended up with all three proposals right at about $74.3 million. So
can you say what Edgemoor's was exactly?
Around $74.3 million.
They all were the
right,
same?
one was 74.2, one was 74.3, one was 74.4.
But there, you said theirs was the lowest though, so was theirs
because they were the one that stepped forward and said we modeled their equity allocation and put it into their issue, but they were the only one that came forward and said, I can do 100%.
So that was kind of a cherry on the top, but when you're looking at just an
When we
annual
looked at the
financing
funding,
payment,
they were all right
like
there. Right.
74.2 or 3, but you don't know whether they have the 74.2 or the 74.3.
Right. We normalized it and got into that same framework, but when you're talking about $1 billion project and financing something over 30 years, which is to talk about 74.2 versus 74.3, that variation could disappear the day you go to the market to sell the bonds. I mean, they're essentially no change.
So if
no
they
difference.
if they do the 100% conduit bond financing option, will they be able to lower that?
That would lower that
to
number.
what?
Oh, we haven't modeled that number yet. So.
You all have really talked words of transparency in this process, also applauding some of the companies that went ahead and released their proposals to the public. Edgemoor is the only company that didn't, and now you're also saying that you appreciate that they kind of stayed out of the fray. So kind of explain that balance.
Basically, after the interview process, we approached the companies when other companies were releasing their proposals and said, would you, as part of our change, we said, would you be willing to release the data if asked? Edgemoor's response to us was, we will do whatever you tell us you would like us to do. So if you want us to release the data, we will release the data. If you don't, we will hold it back. And so I appreciated that response because, again, they recognized who their customer was, who their client was going to be. So we will be releasing the Edgemoor proposal in its full detail as part of this release recommendation that goes for the City Council. But again, I appreciate their issue of not trying to involve themselves in the day-to-day issue, the up and downs of the selection process.
So at the time, did you tell them not to?
Nope. We said it's entirely at your discretion, and their response back is, we'll release it when you say it's okay to release it. We, at that point, just stepped aside and said, we'll let the process go. So we had given them the ability to release, they chose not to, and now they'll release that information.
Will you release that today?
I think we'll get it out today.
Yeah, it should be out.
Should be out now.
Will this process be a new protocol? Because in the beginning it was Burns and Mac and that was it, and boom, until AECOM came in and said, well, wait a minute, we want to be part of this too, and this isn't fair. And then all of the other companies joined in, and now it's Edgemoor. So it seems like, you know, at the beginning it was locked and loaded Burns and Mac, and now because of, you know, somebody coming in and saying, this isn't right, we want to also participate, that we're ending up with a different company, and there's been a totally different process. So will this process be protocol from now on?
This is our standard process. With a, we bid out about $400 million a year in work, whether it's construction work or buying pencils. All of it is done through this type of standard procurement process. So the process that we are articulating today, although it's got a lot more attention, is something the city goes through every day. I have sat in on hundreds of these selection processes. Councilman Reed has done the same thing. So,
well, then how come Burns and Mac was the only one in the beginning? Why wasn't there?
They were the ones that brought forward an innovative proposal. We have the right under the city charter to recommend a sole source contract, which was what the mayor and I brought forward originally, and that was not acceptable to the council. That's their right as policymakers. We then defaulted back to the traditional process.
Can the council choose another of the three bidders or proposers, or can they only vote up or down on Edgemoor?
Well, I think at this point, that's going to be a discussion for council to have. Right now, there has been one ordinance that has been introduced. That ordinance is going to be debated, and there may be other ordinances as well. But ultimately, the council will have to decide what direction they're going to take.
But legally, can they choose another team?
It depends on how they would draft the ordinance.
Okay.
I mean,
Our normal process is that this is for whether you're buying a mile of water line or buying a trash truck or custodial services or whatever you do, is there's a recommendation made by staff through the selection committee. Council votes it up or down. If they vote it down, we re-procure and bring that process back. That's the normal process.
Okay, so are you saying that it would have to go through so they can only vote it up?
If they want to follow the traditional procurement policy of the city, it would be, okay, we don't like who you've picked, go procure again for them.
Jolie, what do you say are the odds that the city council is going to approve Edgemoor?
Rob, I am not a betting person.
Jermaine, you want to take a shot at that?
But I will tell you this. The selection committee has done an amazing job of, frankly, with all the static that's happening outside of the building, taking a look at facts and data. And now it's going to be up to the selection committee to present to the council the facts and data as they see it. And then frankly, this is a recommendation that the council will have to. And so I will not speculate on what's going to happen next. But I think it's very important to note that this selection committee, throughout this entire process, regardless of what was happening outside of this building, they sat focused and frankly laser focused on making sure that we had a process that had integrity and making sure that we made the decision that was best for Kansas City. That's what the selection committee did. Now it's up to the council to determine whether they agree with that.
You know, he asked me, let me answer as well. I don't want to hedge my bets one way or the other. However, what I will mention is something that I've shared with my colleagues, and that is that we must make sure that whatever we decide as a council is something that we all can agree upon as a full council. Because I don't think if we as a council don't agree, or if there appears to be some sort of tensions between us as a council, then there's going to be tension in the community and within this entire city. And at the end of the day, we want to win. We want to win in November, and we want to win for Kansas City. And I believe that what we've seen before us, certainly from all of the proposals, have been world-class proposals that will move our city in the right direction, and a generational approach that for the next 40 years, I look forward to being here and saying that they did the right thing back in 2017. And they're going to be building a new airport then. And so I think that the council, of course, will have that opportunity to decide. And I call now for our colleagues to work together to find what the best solution is in terms of the recommendation that they have before them and move forward from there.
Final question.
Council will be deciding if this happening tomorrow?
Well, as it's been mentioned, the council has an ordinance that unfortunately was not heard today in the finance committee, or finance and airport committee. And so any of our colleagues, or myself, or Councilmember Justice, or Mayor James, can introduce at any time an ordinance from the floor, and if they have 9 votes, they can have it heard right then that day on Thursday at 3 o'clock. At this time, I cannot tell you whether or not my peers are going to be introducing such ordinance, but their ordinance was not heard today, I should say, and next week the council is off for council vacation. Well-needed council vacation.
Troy, can you tell us, one of the lessons seems to be, and one of the things I think I'm hearing you say is, it's not a good idea to campaign for these things if you're a proposer, that this idea of sort of an external campaign might have moved some committee members in one direction. Is that fair to say?
I think it was part of the consideration. At least it was registered in my mind. I'm interested in working with a customer or a client. If we're going to be spending $1 billion as a city, I want to know that they're working in my interests and not necessarily their own interests. And so that issue weighed on it may have weighed differently on other committee members' minds, but that was an important part of the process. Normally, the process, again, as I said, 99.8% of all of our stuff goes through this kind of process, and this process is time-tested. It's worked for decades in terms of delivering good outcomes at reasonable costs, and I'm a big fan of letting the process work, and the noise around it just adds to the drama of the process, but let the process work and you'll be surprised at the end. And you usually get a good outcome.
The bottom line is going to be if the voters vote for this. So
yes.
If they don't vote for it, this is all for naught.
That's right.
People have not voted for a new airport because they like the one that there is now. They find it convenient. It's the way it's been done. So were there renderings, were there things that you considered that maybe Edgemoor offered that would please the voters and the people who are going to ultimately decide if this happened?
I'm going to correct you real fast. Voters haven't had a chance to vote on a new airport. They've not been asked to vote on a new airport. That's never been put before the voters.
Well, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have said vote. When you all did your research.
So now it will be up to, after the council decides how to move forward on this, it will be up to a robust campaign, and it will be up to the developer to go out and make the case for why this is the best decision for Kansas City.
And let me give an historical perspective.
Okay.
Because I think that probably gets to the heart of your question. Mm-hmm. Back in 1960s, about 1966 or so, the city was trying to decide whether or not to move the downtown airport out north to our current location. Then Mayor Ilis Davis championed a campaign, which they were able to have a robust campaign at that time. And the city voted for a new airport. I believe it was 24-1 at that time. And I believe the council, and I'm a student of this history, so I wasn't here in 1966 or 1972 when the new airport was built.
Yeah. But
But I can tell you that from my research and information that I have gathered, that there was that robust decision that the voters in this city decided. And I can tell you from the over 42 listening sessions that our airport have conducted to the 72 better KCI presentations that they made throughout our entire city, and additional listening sessions that certainly have taken place, I think that the tide is turning. And that tide is turning to say that we certainly would like a new airport. I think you've seen that amongst our peers on the council. In addition to that, I can tell you that nearly all of our information that we've continued to review states that many of the people who enjoy the type of convenience in Kansas City for our traditional type airport that we've had since 1972 certainly want to see the same thing. And I think that we will have an opportunity that once we finalize, because at this point, Edgemoor did not present us any sort of renderings,
Okay,
but we
that
will
was-
be able to work through what that looks like, and of course, ultimately, what the council decides in terms of potentially a number 2 pick or not in the renderings that they have presented before us.
So this was based basically on the money and the
Qualifications-based
Right.
selection. Yeah.
Yeah, so then coming into what the voters will actually have to choose from and make their decision from will come later.
Well, exactly, and one of the things that Edgemoor put forth in their proposal was a very detailed timeline of when they would have those designs. And then also, it is very important to stress that we are not starting from scratch here. We started at the Exhibit K process, which frankly was 2 years of the Kansas City Aviation Department, our airline partners, sitting in a room and looking at all of our needs and looking at it from an affordability and a convenience standpoint. And they had basic renderings of what they want this to look like. And so we are a lot farther along than we are in some procurement processes, because we have actually all of that hard work that was done. And what we asked of the proposers is, we've done this, how do you help us take this and finish and deliver the final product?
Will you have an MOU by election day signed? Is that the plan, to have an MOU signed before election day?
That may be an ambitious goal, but we'll give it a shot. Depends on how
How can
fast.
you go to voters without an MOU?
That's going to be the interesting. But we've got it. One of the things in this interregnum, again, I recognize outside counsel, while we were waiting for the process to work, has developed a draft MOU. So it's a question of, once council says we're comfortable with that decision of Edgemoor, I think the actual negotiations, would be our goal is to
Tomorrow,
deliver.
you won't get that for another 2 weeks, so getting an MOU in 6 weeks would be difficult before election.
It's getting, yeah.
Does that hurt the campaign a little bit?
In my opinion, it does not, Dave, and here's why. We have unanimously, as Councilman Reed put forth, come up with language for the ballot that is very, very simple. It is clear. It is straightforward. Kansas City, do you support the building of a new single terminal, knowing that it is paid for by airport revenues? That's what's in front of folks. And so we have to fundamentally go out there and campaign on that issue. And in the meantime, the council has to make a decision on what we want to do moving forward. But I think that those questions are separate, and I think that it's something that we can, this community is smart.
Yeah, but a voter's gonna say, wait a minute, you don't have a signed contract, I don't know whether I wanna do this or not unless I know there's a signed deal and I know how long it's gonna take me to walk in. I mean, it's a sophisticated decision. It's not just sort of, well, should we tear it down?
It's a very sophisticated decision, but I can tell you this, I think the vast majority of Kansas City voters by November 7th are going to go into the polling place and they're going to say, either I am in favor of a new single terminal or I am not. I think that all of those other issues, I think you will have some folks, absolutely, who have those questions, and we're going to do everything in our power to make sure we answer those questions in a timely manner.
But don't you
And
think they're
Dave,
gonna be
I'll
concerned
differ
about
just a little bit.
convenience
I'll
and-
differ just a little bit from Councilmember Justice. And I think that you are correct that there are some of those members of our public who will want those answers. And I think that's the reason why it's important for us as a council to make sure that we work together to make sure that they can have those answers before they go into vote.
Yeah. There's some concern about, there's apparently a pledge by the hometown team that they would put up a certain amount of money for the campaign, and if they were board selected who would pay for the campaign. Is that a concern at this point? Do you know if Edgemoor is pledging to donate to a pro-terminal
I can guarantee that was never part of any of the deliberations of the selection committee.
Okay, folks,
Thank you.
thanks a lot.